You're listening to a production by Bruce Eckfeldt, an industry leader in focused, results-oriented organizational development and performance coaching for startups and high-growth companies. For more information on Bruce and his company, please visit www.eckfeldt.com. That's www.eckfeldt.com.
Hello everyone, welcome to our telesummit. I'm Bruce Eckfeldt and I'm your host. This telesummit is titled Virtual Teams, the Future or Fiction. We'll be exploring what virtual teams are, how you set them up for success, and how you manage them to deliver results. I've lined up over a dozen interviews with experts from several fields to talk about their experiences and to share with you their insights about how to successfully build and manage high-performance virtual teams. For more information on the telesummit and how you can access the other interviews, please visit my website at www.eckfeldt.com/virtual teams. That's www.eckfeldt.com/virtualteams. There you will find all of the interviews along with other great content on team development. Now, on with the show. Welcome everyone. In this interview, I'll be speaking with Cynthia Leeds Friedlander. Cindy is a seasoned coach, adept at managing sensitive work-related issues. She uses a broad approach to decipher challenging situations in practical, results-oriented methods. Her areas of expertise are communication, conflict resolution, career management, career transition, team building, and leadership development. She has worked for many companies, including Bloomberg, ABC Disney, Harpo Productions, American Express, and many others. Cindy is also the author of Speak Easy, the Communication Guide for Career and Life Success. Make sure you listen to the end of the interview where you learn how to get Cindy's contact information, as well as get some great content and free offers that she has so generously extended to our listeners. Without further ado, let's listen to the interview. All right, welcome everyone. So today I'm here with Cindy Leeds Friedlander, and we're going to talk a little bit about virtual teams. But before we dig into the meat of our topic, Cindy, I'd love to have you give our audience just a little bit of background on yourself and what you're working on these days.
Happy to tell you about my work. I have been an executive coach for quite a number of years. My specialty is communication. I'm currently working on a big project that with my third book. I have written a couple books. The main book on communication is called Speak Easy, the Communication Guide to Career and Life Success. And I'm working on another book on another topic and putting together a new website for it. I'm really excited. It's a little premature to talk about that. I do work with people to help them be more effective in the workplace. I work with private individuals and with groups and for companies, corporations, organizations.
Got it. And how long have you been doing this? What's your tenure in the field, as they say?
Well, I like to tell people that I've been coaching since I was 3 years old because I had a sister who was 7 years older than I who never said the right thing to anyone, and I was constantly tugging at her clothes. Judy, don't say that, don't say that. And she didn't appreciate it. Obviously, I was way too little to be doing that. And I started out teaching and did, I was a French teacher, and I did guidance work and did group guidance, and then got into outplacement consulting. That was my foray into my executive coaching. So I've been around a long time working in my area of expertise.
That's great. Thank you. I think it's always helpful to hear kind of people's backgrounds and kind of where they're coming from in this space. And I'm really excited to have you here. I think that the whole kind of communication aspect is obviously key to this topic, and getting your insights and your experience on this is going to be incredibly helpful. So why don't we start with just kind of a conversation around virtual teams from a sort of definition point of view, and what are virtual teams, or how do you see virtual teams? How do you define them? What are the key characteristics? What ideas do you think people have about virtual teams right now? Which ones are correct? Which ones might be incorrect? Give me your thoughts on that.
You know, one of the things I thought would be good to make a contrast to is the concept of flex time and working from home and those kinds of things that have been part of traditional work settings for a long time, and people have biases about that. And now we have virtual teams where there is no actual there is no actual brick and mortar location that people are working from, and they're working from a variety of different geographic locations and physical locations.
Yep.
And I think that there are quite a lot of biases that have been around for a long time. One of the biases is if you're not at work, you're not working.
Yeah.
And, so physically you have to show up. Now, research shows that people spend a great portion of time at work when they're in a physical work setting, not working. And actually that has some pluses and minuses that virtual teams are missing. People that work from home or people that work from workstations or people that are working independently actually are much more dedicated, much more responsible. They are very conscientious about that time, and they have that sense of responsibility and autonomy that is what contributes to work excellence and work success, and what is often missing within physical work settings. So that bias about people who work in virtual teams using their time to do other things besides work is really quite a myth and doesn't apply at all.
Yeah,
so people in traditional work settings spend a large portion of time not working, and people that are working in virtual teams are actually working much harder. I think the pluses and minuses around that have to do with you get superior execution and production from people working in virtual teams. You are missing some of and what I want to talk about is some of the human elements, the human interaction, the validation and reinforcement that comes from people being in contact with each other is some of what's missing. I did a lot of consulting work at Bloomberg, and it's a quite interesting work environment. And people are so used to using technology to communicate that people sitting very close to each other did not have actual interactions. They could have been working from home. They could have been on a virtual team.
Yeah.
They were communicating through technology only. So it's something that really has to be paid attention to today.
Yeah. So why do you think that is, or do you have any thoughts on, when you end up getting in these situations where there's the possibility of more non-virtual, more real face-to-face communication, but people still end up using some of these technologies and tools? What do you think is driving that? Is that everyone is just thinking virtually these days? Is there an actual dynamic that's driving some of those things?
Well, for sure, it is our world today, and it's actually a serious problem. I mean, it's referred to as addiction to technology. And if you walk down the street or you watch, people have got their devices and they are interacting that way. And rather than having a direct phone call, they're using some kind of device to speak. Even it's really interesting because there's some research that's come out lately about actually the harmful effects on both human development, if you will, and also on productivity. And Intel is one of the companies that has been paying a great deal of attention to that. The technology companies often will have their ping pong and various activities in the workplace for people to do to get some breaks. They're looking, though, at that very specific use of time and recognizing how seriously important it is for people to have non-work activity, some kind of interaction that's non-work. So it's really hard to define how that's happening because it's just part of all of our lives, and those who do not have that capacity to use that technology are not in the world very much like the rest of us, and it's a real big challenge. I gave a lot of thought to some of the kinds of activities that can be incorporated into virtual workspaces for people to have more of that.
Sure.
And so I'm happy to share some of the things that I thought about.
Yeah, that'd be great.
If we look at what is really what contributes most to people being productive, the element of creativity is really important. And what increases creativity and what increases people's ability to reach goals is collaboration. So if you give people, teams of people or individuals, goals, and they're working alone, they will not reach their goals as successfully as they would if they're working collaboratively and working in a team.
Okay.
It's the old, the sum of the whole is greater than What's that? What is it?
1 + 1 = 3 kind of thing.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So it's that kind of concept. So even giving people activities that they're working as a team, and it's not part of their work, that actually helps them do their work better. So I tried to think of things that I thought would be really helpful. I related it to the water cooler that has always been talked about, that people talk about stuff over the water cooler. I was speaking to a colleague, a friend, about Game of Thrones, and he was, I said, well, I watch everything on demand. I watch it whenever it's on demand. I like to do that. He said, no, I have to watch it on Sunday night because when I get to work on Monday, people will be talking about it. So I need to do that. So to me, that kind of thing, which is really valuable, is missing in virtual teams because people don't have that walking in, riding the elevator together, walking out, maybe taking a break and going to the gym together or something like that. Yep. So I was thinking of things like, I don't know if you've ever heard of, there's something called Concert Window, and there are all kinds of concerts that are done online, and you can watch them, and there's a chat room while you're watching the concert. And so you can talk to people who are there all over the country, all over the world that happen to be on Concert Window. So I thought that would be the kind of thing. I mean, not during the work period time. Just like we go to a concert after work together, well, we can go to a concert after work together.
Basically finding kind of shared experiences that the team can participate in.
Yeah, so I was thinking if you would have things like puzzles of the week, recipe of the week, who can come up with the best barbecue sauce recipe, things like that, that people are doing together, fantasy football, those kinds of things, that if you add those to the day to the week, to the work life, then the virtual environment becomes more like a real environment. Mm-hmm. One of the things I wanted to talk about, too, was that if you look at what causes derailment in a career path, it's very interesting. It has very little to do with doing your work well. Okay. It's more about those interpersonal dynamics. It's more about interpersonal stuff, emotional intelligence stuff. Those are the things that contribute to people being successful. So I feel like on virtual teams, there's less of a problem about that. I mean, people have work assignments. They're working together. Those personality factors are less interfering, I believe, in virtual environments. So I think a virtual team has some benefit from that. The personality dynamics don't interplay quite as much. On the other hand, they're still really critically important. For example, people will tell me all the time in my coaching work, they'll show me an email or a text that someone sent to them, and they'll say, listen to that. Is that rude? How could that person have been so rude? They're very upset. Yeah. I look at it, I don't know what they're talking about. It just seems like some facts on paper. I see nothing about it. 93% of communication is nonverbal and tone of voice. Yeah. What happens when we're only communicating through technology and through written words is that people start interpreting anyway.
Yeah, of course.
And it can really interfere. And so what it really means is we've got to have direct communication. We really have to have direct communication.
So let me just recap that a little bit. So I get the idea that for a virtual team, that on one hand, because you have less kind of interpersonal communication, that the interpersonal issues or a lower level of emotional intelligence or interpersonal dynamics for individuals on one hand might help them, or they're not as exposed to issues on it on one hand, but on the other hand, it's something that then takes away from the work and the quality of the work because you don't have that. So So I get you have
yeah,
that.
it's
a little
isn't
bit
it?
catch-22. Well, I get it. It's like it on one hand, it's what makes virtual teams work so well is because it does break it down to a more task-oriented approach to the work rather than a team-oriented approach to the work. But the other hand, to really be effective as a virtual team, you ultimately need to work as a team. So you need to bring back that emotional intelligence into the equation.
Right, and one of the things I want to underscore too is what happens with virtual teams, or what happens when people are communicating digitally, and that they are using that exclusively. They're using that as their primary exclusive form of communication. So I thought it would be very good to talk about what kind of communications are best done through that type of communication, the written communication, and what types should not be done through written communication. So, of course, executables, timelines, goal clarification, those kinds of things are supremely done and much better done through written communication and through that kind of communication because you have a paper trail or a digital trail. You have a trail and you can go back to it and say, this is what we agreed to, or this is where we were. Those kinds of things should be done only that way and always that way. Where you want to be careful, and this is where people really get into difficulty, is that if they're writing any kind of emotional response or criticism.
Yep.
Now, if criticism has an executable in it, fine. We agreed X would take place at X time, and here's where we are now. By the way, I want to throw into that, too, in all communications, written or verbal, you want to look for affirmative communication. People will say things like, big contributors, people that want to contribute to the team and really want to participate fully, will say things like, that will never work. That will never work. So instead of saying that will never work, what you want to say is, here's what we need to do for success. Here's how we need to do this, as opposed to that will never work.
Yeah.
And so there are all kinds of things that can be added to your communication to make those communications so that people are receptive and on board and they are not experiencing it as criticism. Feedback is important.
Yep.
And giving people good feedback is essential for success. And critiquing what people do and giving them notes is very helpful in the workplace, and particularly on virtual teams when people are all spread out and they aren't aware of the impact of something they're doing on someone else. They don't see it.
Yeah.
So that feedback is important. We have a tendency to write now things that we would never say. And it's all over the internet. It's all over all forms of interaction. So I would never have that type of criticism come out of my mouth if you were next to me, in front of me. I feel completely free to do that in writing. And it's very dangerous. So I recommend that people, number one, if they're having an emotional response, save it. Save it. Never, ever write a response in the middle of an emotional response. If you have a reaction, you feel yourself having a reaction, save it.
Yeah.
And even if you need to respond right away, say, I'm having an unusual reaction, or I need to think through what you just wrote me. I'll get back to you.
Yeah.
So let the person know you received their communication, and do not respond in the moment. So that's one thing.
That's kind of a lesson for life, too.
Look at what you are writing. And if you would never say what you were writing, then don't write it.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. And I guess, I mean, it's kind of this test. Like, how do you, I mean, do you advocate, like, having a little mirror that you you read your email to yourself before you send? Or how do you actually catch that?
Well, it's really interesting you said if you have a mirror, because the two biggest contributors to how communication is received are tone of voice and facial expression. Neither of those can exist when you're writing, and yet they do. For example, if I'm smiling when I talk to you, which I am right now, you can hear it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I never suggested to people, one of the things I suggest to people is, and I've been doing it as we've been talking, is I stand up and walk around.
Yep.
Because my energy changes, and it's helpful, actually. So you do want to get your body to be reflecting a more business or a more professional or a more presentation.
Yeah.
If you're speaking on the phone, of course, if you're writing, that doesn't work. When you're writing, although I imagine there's some people that have figured that one out as well. So that's an interesting concept to think about, Mirror. You know, I want to go back to executables, timelines, goal clarification. Those things need to be in writing, and people do not proof most email communication or text communication the way we always proofed written communications in the past. And it's sloppy. It has errors. And we also live in such a fast-paced world. So it's hard to be proofing when you're just rolling out communications. Again, if we go back to, if you're expressing opinions and emotions, you want to pay more attention than just quick comments. I'm a stickler for proofreading. I'm a stickler for proofreading. I really am.
I get it. I think I've kind of have sort of two levels of proofreading. I have more official communication proofreading where I'm really making sure grammar, spelling, all those things are right. And then I have a level which is really just more intent. And it's, am I communicating, am I getting my point across in the way that I want to get it across, but I may not be sitting there, checking every piece of it. And I find that because of that issue that you raised, which is there's so much communication, everything, whether it's texting people, emailing people, so much happens now written that trying to really wordsmith every communication is daunting and just not possible.
And this relates to what happens on virtual teams, in that the number of eyeballs that get on various communications changes a little bit.
Yeah.
And if it's something that's going to have some kind of public consumption, client viewing, hierarchy viewing, there is an importance to what things look like and the correctness of things. I think a lot of people think correctness doesn't matter anymore. Mm-hmm. And for many things it might not. There are a couple things I had wanted to talk about. One was the kind of roles that exist that are outside of the actual role a person has, their job title role.
Okay. And
people, it's a natural thing. It's based on people's personalities and preferences and styles. I made up a list of them: the cheerleader, the coach, the motivator, the consoler, the bean counter, the policeman or compliance whip cracker.
Yeah.
Those things. And even if they're not identified in a traditional work setting, people are aware of them.
Yeah.
And to me, rather than make fun of them or resent them, oh, God, that person is such a bean counter, drives me crazy.
Yeah.
Or, oh, you'd think he was the compliance officer here, the way he does whatever. So instead of complaining about those roles, be aware of them and say, and this relates to what we were talking about, find the bean counter, find the whip cracker.
Yeah.
And say, would you take a look at this, please? So let someone else do that. And it's also more than one set of eyeballs on something is always important. You think you expressed what you intended to express, and it may not be what other people are seeing or hearing.
Yeah. So
again, virtual teams, there's a lot more isolation in what people are producing. Sometimes, just like you were saying, Bruce, it won't matter. When it matters, get more eyeballs on it.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion or kind of strategy is, have at least one other person, take a look at it and get their read on how it's coming across. It is just about impossible for you to anticipate how someone else is going to take something completely by yourself, and having at least one other person give their feedback can be incredibly important to that. I think that's great.
Or just proof your own work. I always say you can only be a virgin once.
Yeah, exactly.
You need someone else to take a look and use, and again, that's part of what a team does, right?
Yeah.
So that's using team interaction for the benefit of everyone.
Yeah. The other one I think you mentioned in there too, which I thought was good, is I guess you were mentioning it when you were communicating that I'm having an emotional response right now. I think I'll get back to this in a little bit. It's just being more kind of deliberate or more communicative around the emotional side of what's happening in a situation. So even when writing an email, sometimes now I'll be more. I'll even preface the email with, hey, this is really difficult for me, or I'm really confused about the situation. So this is my understanding, but you should understand that I'm not completely sure of it, or I feel like I need to get this out, but it's stressful for me. So understand that when you're reading it. I'll almost give like it's like in a play or a script where you have the setup to the scene before you actually start reading the dialogue.
Foreshadowing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wanted to go back to the suggestion I made about letting people know you're having a reaction. I may or may not have used the word emotional. You just used the word emotional. I'd recommend neutral language. So I'm having a reaction to this, or I want to give this more thought, or I want to, you can always be marketing yourself a bit. You can say things like, I want to give you a really good answer to this, so let me think about it before I respond. If you say I'm having an emotional response, that might set up, oh, here we go.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So you want to stay away from emotional words, actually. And I always recommend people, and particularly women, staying away from touchy-feely language because people say that women are more touchy-feely. So you want to stick with more rational language, more practical, logical language. And I want to underscore again the contrast now. I just said women are seen as more touchy-feely and stay away from that. Then I told you earlier on that the emotional intelligence portions, or the soft skills, are actually what contribute to work success. Yeah. So there's a very interesting combination there. So we want to stay businesslike, and we want to make sure that we also include human components in what we're doing, because we are not robots. Yep. We are humans. Yep. And one of the points I wanted to make was just to go back to birth and to us in our first stages. Babies that are born and are raised in orphanages and they get cared for, are not fondled, hugged, given human comfort. They just have their diapers changed and they're fed. They die. Those babies die. Yeah. So we as human beings need to have human interaction. Yeah. It's critically important. And again, actual touching in the workplace, that's the advantage of virtual teams. They don't have to ever have any of those kinds of issues. So it's not that we are to become intimate with people in our workplace. That's not a good idea. However, having a friendly work environment is very important. And another one that contributes so much to good work environments is humor in the workplace. It's really important. And on virtual teams, you have to be really careful of that, because some things in writing come out wrong. So you do want to be careful of that. And you also want to make sure that if you are interjecting some kind of humor, which is beneficial in the workplace, it must not be sarcasm or cynicism. It must not be at the expense of anyone. Yeah. So they're tricky elements. Communication is tricky. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and certainly given the types of channels and types of modes of communication that virtual teams have to rely upon, it is it's more so. Any thoughts on more of like the audio and the video? I mean, I think a lot of work right now. People are trying to push toward this, video chatting and things like that, rather than just phone calls. Do you think that's helpful? Do you think that's not? Is that a whole different ball of wax?
Well, I did want to talk about it. There were two topics that I wanted to make sure we got to in this conversation. One had to do with meetings and really relates to what you were saying. And the other has to do with leadership and leaderless teams and how leadership forms with virtual teams. I don't know how much you're talking about this with your other panelists. I think it's a very interesting topic to talk about.
I'd love to hear what you have to say on it.
Yeah. So the video conferencing or video chat or Skyping using video, sometimes it's helpful. It's still a little artificial. I think the video conferencing is a little bit, if there's some kind of, I think for virtual teams, if there can be a video meeting that takes place on a regular basis, and if that's possible for team members, and even if there is some use of a facility that is more where they can come together, those that are somewhat close to each other for video conferencing, that can help. Yeah. It does the visual. The more of the senses you can incorporate, the more helpful it is for people. And for some people, that visual is so important. For other people, the audio is important. I think it's helpful if you can have them. I think it's very important to leverage the best aspects of those mechanisms, those technologies that you are using, and just be very aware of them. What has been your experience with that? How would you answer that question?
Yeah, I mean, I guess generally I try to push to a higher, highest level of bandwidth that you can. So I would generally suggest video over just audio. However, I try to make sure that people are still cognizant of their communication sort of approach, and that it's not perfect, and there's still risk of misinterpretation, still risk of getting intents crossed in the communication. So you still need to be very careful or very deliberate with what you're communicating and how you're communicating. But I do find that the video adds a nice piece. The one thing I actually really like about video is that people actually see themselves. And they will start. It's kind of the mirror on the wall, and the mirror on the wall was an old sales trick that I learned many years ago. But if you watch yourself, and I even do this, if I'm on a call with somebody, I'll look at myself in the video just to catch my own facial expressions, because that ends up being a good tell for you on how you're coming across. So if I'm frowning or I'm furrowed brow and that stuff, that will cue me in that I'm probably coming across as frustrated, or I'm coming across as being upset. And so I will work to actually catch myself in the video, not only looking at them but looking at me too. So I tend to like that. It's the issue that I find on Teams is when you have different levels of communication for different folks. So if some folks can do a lot of video because they have good connections and good setups, but a couple people can't, the challenge there is you end up with kind of different class citizens, and different people can start to feel really, and not only feel that way, I mean they are, you end up getting kind of excluded if you don't have good video set up and you're only doing audio and everyone else is doing video. And that's a challenge on a team, I find. And no great solution.
Yes, that's another topic that I just wanted to talk about, that I think virtual teams are more likely to have a more level playing field than other kinds of teams, than traditional teams. Yeah. And that's really important. And the more level a playing field there is between speakers, between team members, even from leadership to in the hierarchy, if the communication is level, that really helps. And there are numerous things that contribute to people feeling like it's not a level playing field. Just like you said, if everyone has video and I only have audio, I can feel like I'm a different class player on the team. So that's really important. And sometimes it's unavoidable. However, the communication can continue to be level. What I wanted to talk a little bit about related to this is team meetings. Mm-hmm. In my work as a coach, I have found that one of the deterrents to good team work is people feeling like they're out of the loop. They are not being kept informed. They're not getting feedback. They don't have information that they need. Or for some reason, people at a different level are keeping information from them because they're not at the right level to get the information. The more informed people can be, the better. And it's really interesting to talk to people and get feedback about meetings in a work environment. And meetings can be the biggest time sucker there is. They can be a real waste of time.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I always hear in feedback that I get, we don't have enough meetings. We're not, we're not working together. We're not informed, and we need to have more meetings. So meetings have to be managed very well, and then this will feed into the topic of leadership in a minute, or leaderless meetings and like that. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. First, so how to have an effective meeting, making sure that people are contributing, and having some kind of a regular set time that everybody agrees to, probably weekly or twice a month or something like that, where everybody's coming together and it's agreed to. And even if someone who is crucial can't be there, the meeting is not canceled. The meeting takes place, and people know how to manage those meetings. Those are really important. Today, we have so many people that can be doing something else while a meeting is going on.
Yeah.
And, we call it multitasking. What it might be, though, is I'm not interested in this meeting, and I'm going to be sending some email, or I'm going to be doing something different.
Yep.
So those things really need to be managed so that people are present for meetings and present for communications, and that's managed well. And the most important thing is to get input. I think surveys are one of the best, not over-surveying. Anything that's a good thing, if you do it too much, it's not a good thing anymore. But if you survey people and ask them, what are the ingredients they think will make for the best meetings? What is the frequency of meetings that they think is right for that kind of meeting? And people are putting input into it and sharing the leadership or facilitation or participation in the meetings. You're going to have great meetings. And people will feel like this is what I asked for, instead of, why are we doing this? Yeah.
I get it. So let's talk a little bit about leadership. I know you wanted to mention that.
Right. And I'd like to know what you're seeing in terms of the concept of leaderless or shared leadership. That's really what I wanted to talk about. I think that virtual teams do lend themselves to the concept of shared leadership, and everyone is contributing and everyone is participating. If you have no leader, you tend to end up somewhere different from your goal, or you can have a bad leader and end up somewhere different from your goal. Good leadership does have to do with reaching goals. It has to do with vision and has to do with inspiring people to meet goals. So I feel that there is a plus with virtual teams in that there's such a strong sense of responsibility about contribution, and that creates a shared leadership environment and a level playing field. On the other hand, if there are X number of team members all heading down the road, and it's not the same road, then what? So what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, what I find is that the more effective virtual teams have very strong individual sort of contributors that are self-managed, and that they once a clear direction has been set, they are very good at working by themselves and collaboratively with others to hit that objective. That the real leadership role on these kind of virtual teams, high-performance virtual teams, is much more one of goal setting and boundary defining than it is around managing the actual work. And a good virtual team leader is one that can be very clear on, what is the real objective and how can I define it in very clear, measurable terms, and how can I create good sort of boundaries for that team to know what is kind of either in or out of scope, or in or out of bounds in terms of the work that needs to get done, and then can facilitate the teams being basically self-managing in terms of actually executing the work. And they become, they're a team member as well, so they're part of that work. getting done most often. But it's really that goal setting, because without a clear objective, it's tough for a virtual team, tough for any team, but particularly a virtual team, to come up with its own goal. It's just that is tough to have a team do that on its own.
Yes, and there's also the concept of how creativity and brainstorming enhances process.
Yeah.
And so I feel that it is valuable to add some component of that contribution, and it's somewhat like what I was talking about a moment ago. When something is imposed on people, they have more resistance to it or less buy-in.
Yeah.
When they feel like they have contributed to the task and to the goal setting, they have much more dedication to doing a really good job.
Yeah, there's a somewhat applicable military analogy in this, when the whole idea of commander's intent, where when a troop is given orders, the idea is that the commander gives the intent of what they're trying to get done. They're trying to protect a road or take a hill or maintain a strategic position, and that intent is described, and it's up to the team to decide what is the best way of executing that. And when you get into the battlefield and new things come up, there's new intelligence, there's new situation changes. Well, how do I adjust then my plan, keeping the intent in mind, but now having the flexibility to be able to execute differently, rather than getting stuck in very direct or specific objective orders of put your people here. This is what I'm trying to achieve. You figure out the best way to do that within the kind of confines or within the context of the broader situation. And I think that's a great way of kind of looking at the team process in general, particularly virtual teams, is really giving them the intent of what we're trying to get done, and then let them figure out how they're going to meet, where they're going to meet, how the work is going to get allocated, how it gets divvied up, who works on what, because all of that is something they'll be able to not only figure out, but actually adjust over time as they learn and things change.
It's very interesting that you're using a military model to describe that. I was reminded, as you were talking, of Daniel Goleman's Harvard Business Review article called Leadership That Gets Results. That's Daniel Goleman, Goleman. He writes a good deal about leadership and about emotional intelligence. And he talks about various leadership styles and their effectiveness in various situations. So that military model is absolutely an incredibly necessary model in emergencies, and the processing of let's figure out how to get there. In major military emergencies, you need that military leadership to say, do it this way now, and that leader that people will follow into battle no matter what is a good leadership model. However, it's very undesirable model over time. It can be very destructive on different kinds of environment where there isn't an emergency, where there isn't that kind of emergency. So those are very interesting models, and he intends them to be leadership models. I use them as communication models, and they really help people look at how to develop different styles. Yeah. So that's something worth
if you send me
taking a look at.
Send me the link to that, and for the listeners here, I will put that on the page that you're listening to this program on, just so you have an access to it, because I think that's that's probably a good resource for people.
Yes, it's really quite wonderful, and I feel like there was something else you said that reminded me of something, and now it's not about leadership, and it's about it's gone. It's gone. I can't think of it.
That's fine. And we're probably kidding our time here as well. So why don't we just wrap up with a little bit about how people can learn a little bit more about you. I know you've mentioned you've got a couple of books out. You're working on a book. How can people contact you, find more information? What's the best means?
www.speakeasycoach.com.
Very good. So I'll make sure that is on the...
That's the website, and it's Cynthia at speakeasycoach.com is my email. It's very nice. You listened carefully and called me Cindy at the beginning. I do like to be called Cindy, and I feel more comfortable with that. However, if anyone's looking to find anything about me,
yes.
it's Cynthia is where I appear officially. Cynthia Leeds Friedlander.
Great.
And the Friedlander is spelled Friedlander. It looks like fried. So if anyone wants to Google, they'll find me.
Yeah, that's great. And like I said, I'll put links to all of that on the page here so people can contact you. Cindy, this was a pleasure. I appreciate the time. I appreciate the conversation. The content was great. I really thank you for it.
Well, I want to commend you for putting this all together. I know it has been a tremendous amount of work, and I'm sure it's going to be very beneficial to a lot of people.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to seeing it all come together and then getting feedback from everyone. So, thanks again, and I will.
And I wanted to say one more thing. I have a private practice, so I work with private individuals as well as work for organizations as a consultant. So I did want to say that so people would know they can contact me for private individual coaching, counseling.
Yeah. That's great. And you're based in the New York City area, just because I know there's going to be people all over the world on this one. So.
Yes, I'm based in the New York City area. I'm very mobile and flexible on my geography, and virtually I coach people all over the world, and it's really interesting that on Facebook and LinkedIn, et cetera, I've now seen what people look like that I coached years ago. The one person in particular I coached in London who I saw a few weeks ago on LinkedIn, and I said, oh, I know what he looks like now. I never did.
But it's funny how that ends up happening in this day and age. Oh, good.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you again. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll keep in touch. Take care, Cindy. Thanks. Thanks, everyone. I'm Bruce Eckfeldt, and you've been listening to our telesummit titled Virtual Teams, The Future or Fiction. For more information on the telesummit and how you can access the other interviews, please visit my website at www.eckfeldt.com/virtualteams. That's www.eckfeldt.com/virtualteams. There you will find all of the interviews, along with other great content on team development. As always, I love feedback. If you have any questions or comments or would like to know more information on how you can make your virtual team successful, please email me at virtualteams@eckfeldt.com. Thanks again for listening, and keep in touch.